There are times when, honestly, life can be just a little bit overwhelming, and hence the title of my message is Giant-Sized Headaches. And I don't know about you, but I suspect that all of you have at one time or another had a problem that literally just paralyzed you with fear. There is very few people who go through life without having to face fear, without having to face doubt. And fear has a way of defeating us before we even start. When I am certain that I will fail, I will refuse to even try. But I will tell you this, our God promises to take us through even the hardest of times. Our scripture today comes from 1 Samuel 17, 3 through 11, and I'm breaking it up into portions. So 3 through 11 will be the first scripture. And this is the story that most of you grew up in Sunday school with, which is David and Goliath. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out of the camp a Philistine, a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, and his helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, the weight of which the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin bronze slung between his shoulders. And the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield bearer went before him. And he stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourself and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be the servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now all those shekels and cubits don't mean a whole lot to you because we don't do it that way. But historians will tell you that Goliath was between 6'9" and 9 feet, depending on how you translate the Hebrew. I lean towards the 9-foot mark because if you look at his other accoutrement, a 6'9" man would have trouble with the weights that he had. His spearhead weighed 17 pounds, and the spear length was 12 foot 7 inches. His armor weighed between 125 and 150 pounds. And like I said, I used to carry almost 60 pounds of material when I was a police officer. To carry 150 pounds, the man had to be much bigger than the average guy. So I lead towards that 9 foot. But this man terrified the army of Saul and Saul himself. He challenged them to a duel, and they literally shrunk from it. They were serving the God of the universe. And yet, this man was too much of an overwhelming threat for them. It's a little bit difficult to sit here and judge them harshly because we know the outcome. But if I'm facing a 9-foot giant and no one else is willing to step forward, I can tell you that's a people frozen in fear. They're living with a total saying, there's no way we can handle this. The second part of our scripture is chapter 17 through 23. And Jesse, David's father, sent his son down to check on his brothers. And it says, Jesse said to David, his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp of your brothers. And take these 10 cheeses to the commanders of their thousands. See if your brothers are well, and bring them some token from them." Now Saul and they all were the people of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting in the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left with the sheep with a keeper and took provisions and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment of the host that was going about the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and Philistines drew up for battle and army against the army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper and the baggage, and ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. And he talked to them. Behold, the champion Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came out of the ranks of Philistine, and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. David is just a boy. He's too young to serve in the army, which would have put him below 20. Most would suggest he's between 13 and 16 years of old. I think most of us would consider that a young boy. I know that when I was 13 or 16, I thought I was a full-grown man, but now I look back and say, no, I wasn't. But when David comes out to the army and he hears this and sees that the army of Saul is frozen in fear, he can't understand it. David is the only man in a boy's body who can literally look at this Goliath and say, why is this going on? Why has no one took the challenge? Why has no one come up before him? And I would suggest to you that David in his youth, perhaps with a little naivete, is that he didn't have fear. He didn't know what fear looked like. It's not that he's never faced danger. In fact, as he's going to tell Saul later on, he's killed lions and bears. But the truth of it is, David is a young man. And I will suggest to you, that's one reason why we send so many young men and women off to war, is they still have that naivete about death. And I will say this, the lack of fear that David had with Goliath fled him in his older age as he grew older. You will not see people facing their fear and going forward in doubt. And I think when it comes down to it, we oftentimes let fear overwhelm us. We let fear take over our bodies and our faith. We do not understand that we serve a God who is bigger than any giant that we may face in our world. And just as David faced a giant of a man at 9 feet tall, you face giants. You are facing giants today. Things that overwhelm you. Things that feel like they're going to crush you because they're so large. There's no easy answer. And I swear, we are not a people without hope. We are a people who serve the same God as David did. We want to move down to verses 31 through 37 in 1 Samuel 17. It says, when the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them to Saul, and he sent for them. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go out and fight this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go out and fight this Philistine and fight him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war since his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered him out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and I struck him and I killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. For he has defiled the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Saul was desperate. Here was a teenage boy. And you know what? Nobody else was willing to go out and do this. And this boy says, not only can I do it, I will be victorious. He had a confidence that comes from that youth. But what he had, more importantly than a confidence, was a willingness to take fear and put it in its place. I was a police officer, and I have been in many situations where fear paralyzed the individuals in the situation. They sat there in total fear and didn't do anything. In fact, I've seen police officers fall into that same category. Fear has an overwhelming ability to rob you of the ability to act. And I'm here to tell you, in whatever situation that you find that you're afraid, no action is almost always worse than any other action. Fear will cause you to not do anything. And that's where Saul's army was at. Every time Goliath would come out, they just trembled in fear and says, there's nothing we can do. Their fear captured them and kept them. But David's very much, I've seen things worse than this myself. Like I said, the sad truth is that in a few years, David will become an old man, and this confidence that he had would leave him. Fear is something that will never leave you. You will never be free of fear in your life. But how you handle that fear will determine how you live your life. David went out confident that he was going to be victorious. And I love that because what it takes to conquer fear is a confidence. Not that I'm going to always succeed. When you're facing death, there is always that possibility that, yes, death could take you. But as a Christian, as I just shared in our memorial service, death is not the ultimate victory. It is not the ultimate end. For a Christian to die simply means they go to meet their Lord. I have shared this story many times, both in sermons and in Bible studies, but there is a true story of a missionary lady in Africa. Elderly woman, very meek and mild, gray-haired lady. You wouldn't think much of her. But she would go into these African villages and she'd preach the love of Jesus. And this is an area that was controlled by a warlord who went into those same villages and wanted to get teenage kids to be warriors for him. And he found that this woman's message was contradicting his ability to get good quality young people. And so he says, I got to stop this woman. So he confronted her, put a gun to her face, and says, you have two choices. You will either stop preaching Jesus Christ to these kids, or I will kill you right now. And the elderly woman smiled and patted her bag. And in Africa, you have a ceremonial dress called a sari. And I'm not probably pronouncing that right. But it's for special occasions. And many women would carry that sari with them for their funeral. She goes, in this bag is my sari. If you shoot me today, I go home to be with my Lord. You bless me, because I will go home. If you do not shoot me today, I will go back into that village and I will preach Jesus Christ to those kids, because that also blesses me. Either way, you bless me today. The warlord lowered his gun and walked away. True story. That woman faced the reality of death, but she did it with the understanding that she knew that there are much worse things than death. When you've stared death in the face, and I have, you learn there are much worse things. This army facing Goliath was frozen in fear and would have never acted for the lack of fear. We simply can be frozen. As Christians, we can take our lives and make them completely unable to tell the world about it. You are going to have giant-sized headaches. Saul's giant-sized headache was named Goliath. But trust me, every one of you faces a very giant-sized headache. There will be times where your fear will paralyze you and you'll say, there is no way I can face this. There is no way I can go on. There is no way to go beyond where I'm at. And that fear can paralyze you in your life, in your mission, and your abilities. To get beyond that, I simply have to remember what David said to Saul. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Now that's scary talk. Because what it means is, yes, this terrifies me, but no, I will not let it paralyze me. Fear will paralyze you if you let it. If you tell yourself, I refuse. I used to teach women's self-defense. And when I taught that, I would always tell them, your first action is going to be fear and disbelief. When you're being attacked, you're going to say, no, this isn't happening. And so often you'll just freeze and do nothing because it's just a shock. And you don't know what to do and you don't know why it's going on. And you're just paralyzed. And I says, you have to get beyond that and say, no. What is happening, I can change. When I was doing it, which was back in the 1970s, which tells you a little bit how old I am, there was a story of an 82-year-old woman who got mugged by a young punk. And he pulled a knife on her and wanted her purse. And this 82-year-old one very adamantly grabbed his ear, twisted his earlobe, and drug him down the block to a police officer and says, this man needs to be talked to. Now, that 82-year-old woman probably should not have done that. But it worked because fear did not paralyze her. As a Christian, when you face the overwhelming challenges that you will face, and let me be very clear, you will face paralyzing fear in your life. If you have not already, it is coming. Just like what I told those women, you prepare for that. You get a mindset that says, when I feel that fear, when I feel everything in me lock up and say, oh no, this is hopeless, I turn my eyes to God and say, Lord, something needs to happen here. David said that, and as you might well know, if you've read the story or went to Sunday school, David went out with one single rock, took a 9-foot giant and dropped him dead. Shouldn't have happened. And the fear went from Saul's army to the Philistines' army. And when they saw a little teenage boy go out and kill their champion, they fled. For you and me, if I live my life in fear, if I am paralyzed by the fear of what if, there is no question it will defeat us. It's funny because as a police officer, I had many people describe me as being fearless. And the funny part about that is that I grew up as a little boy afraid of everything. From the dark to you name it. I had a father that beat me on a regular basis. There was very few things as a little boy that I was not afraid of. I spent my life living in fear. And then as a police officer, I was called to act in situations that people called fearless. The reality of both of those situations was this. The situations I feared as a child were not as overwhelming as I thought they were. And when I faced those fearless things, and I went into situations, it was not that I went without fear. I'm here to tell you, when David walked onto that valley, there was an element of fear in his heart. There had to be. That's your human nature saying, this is dangerous. The difference is what you do with that fear. What you do with the way that fear affects you. I cannot take you through your battles. But I can tell you that if you allow the fear to paralyze you, those battles will defeat you. On the same token, if you refuse to let fear control you, and you say, I will, with the grace of God, face this, and there is nothing that can happen to me that God cannot maintain. My friends, there's absolutely no fear in the world too strong for you. There is no possible solution that will paralyze you because you are going in God's way. You know your God will carry you through this. Whether he delivers you like that elderly missionary, she did not know whether he would pull the trigger or not, but she knew. Either way, God wins. Either way, she had nothing to fear. My friends, the message I have for you today is you serve a God that no matter what you fear, no matter what is paralyzing you today, God wins. He takes over and he will maintain. You live in a world that is in full of crisis. I hear the news people swearing up and down that World War III is coming. And I will tell you this, they're not wrong. Because I've read the Bible, and the Bible tells me there will be a final battle in Armageddon in the Middle East, which, by the way, 80 years ago, nobody thought the Middle East was anything. And now it's the center of the world, isn't it? Amazing how the Bible knew that 4,000 years ago. I can tell you not what's going to happen tomorrow, but I can tell you, as I've joked with my Bible study many times, I know how it ends. I've cheated and looked at the end of the book, and in the last chapter, God wins. God wins. Do I have anything to fear? Yeah. I will have fear all my life. There will always be fear in your life. Whether that fear paralyzes you or not is up to you and your ability to trust God. When you get a giant-sized headache, you need a giant-sized aspirin. His name is Jesus Christ. When I live in that faith, I no longer am controlled by my fear, but I am controlled by the knowledge that my God has this, that he will take me through whatever I'm afraid of, and he will deliver me. And it may or may not look like what I want. Like that missionary lady, she could just as easily have gotten a bullet that day. I can show you thousands of missionaries that die in the field. Did they lose? I would tell you no. Those missionaries died telling people about Jesus, and they went instantly to heaven. And that, my friends, is victory. I am a Christian. Nothing this world can do to me can overwhelm God's love and assurance of my salvation and my ability to trust him. But my fear can certainly get in the way of that. And if I let that fear run and paralyze me, it will certainly keep me from serving God in the way He would have me do it. So my friends, if you face giant-sized headaches today, and many of you are, and many of you will continue to, remember David and Goliath. When a young boy, confident in God's abilities, said, I think I'll go out there and beat me down a giant. And he did. You have that same ability because you serve that same God. Let no giant terrify you. Let no giant paralyze you. Know your God has this and will continue to carry that through. Thank you.